I will start with a story. A man is walking on a beach. The sun is bright and it's hot. So he is not in great mood. Also, he has recently been to his mother's funeral and he did not cry there. You know, the kind of man who doesn't feel much, the man who is considered to be the manliest man in our society. He's been moving through the days since, just living, like someone watching his own life in a movie. Now, on the beach, he sees another man. He has a knife. The other man has a knife. And our guy, he has a gun. And there's an argument between them, a trivial argument that blows out of proportion. Our guy pulls the trigger and he kills the other man. And then he pulls the trigger four more times. Later in the story, when they ask him why did he do that, he says that the sun was too bright, as if he was getting irritated by the sun, like in that sense. And that's it. And that was his explanation. The sun was very bright and he couldn't see properly and he fired out of irritation. Now, he doesn't even understand why this is supposed to be a problem. Rather, he thinks the problem is that everyone around him is making this murder about how he is emotionally distant and honest about it. And that makes him some kind of alien, hence a criminal. This man's name is Musol, if I am pronouncing it correctly. He is the main character of a novel called The Stranger, written by Albert Camus in 1942. Even after the spoilers, it's still worth reading. And like other works by Camus, this book has been studied quite a lot. And the reason it is studied isn't because of the murder, it's because of the absence of feeling around the murder. Now, in the book, our main guy, he isn't a violent man. He doesn't hate the person he kills. In fact, he barely knows him. And still, he pulls the trigger because, and this is the whole point of the book, he thinks he's being honest to himself, honest to whatever he was feeling at the moment, and he acted accordingly. The capacity to feel the weight of another person's life was absent. Not because he's cruel, because something has been hollowed out. Camus wrote this in 1942. He thought it was the central problem of modern existence. And this story came to my mind because of the recent news. A few days ago in Mumbai, you must have heard it's all over the social media. A 22-year-old named Mayank Lohar was stabbed to death on a local train, killed by a 30-year-old Roshan Suvarna. The argument was about the door. It was raining heavily that night. There was some disagreement and blah blah blah, whatever you must have heard on the social media. You know the rest. Now, these are grown men. They are not teenagers. And because they somehow lack the capacity to deal with disagreement, one of them is dead. This isn't a case of violent criminal preying on an innocent person. This is two ordinary people on a train. One of them killed the other over a trivial disagreement. Now, there's a difference between I disagree with you and I'm going to end your life. Where is that difference? These two lines have become the same. That difference had a name, by the way. It was called conversation. Remember the slow, irritating, often unsatisfying process in which two people work out a disagreement using words? That process used to be the default. Now, for a growing number of people, it doesn't even register as an option. There's this other news as well, the Pune one. A 25-year-old Ketan Agarwal was pushed off a cliff at Lohagad Fort by his fiancée. This investigation is still ongoing, but the police account and most of social media says that she planned the murder with another man she was actually involved with. And they planned it for days. And in between, there was a failed attempt as well. The poor guy didn't notice, or maybe he did notice and convinced himself it was nothing. The way people do when they love something or someone blindly, because the alternative is unthinkable at that moment. And then comes the part that would make you rage. She posted an Instagram story mourning him. She wrote something like, "You left me on my birthday," and they were getting close to getting married, and it's unfair that he left, and some bullshit. Now, how do you go from taking someone's life to an Instagram tribute? At least our lead character, Masold, from the story, at least he was honest about his feelings. Now, I'm not going to comment on the legal case. The case will play out. People will talk about it for a while, just like I am, and forget about it, just like I will. I mean, that's how things go. But I want to talk about the gap. The same gap as the Mumbai case, but completely different in shape here. In Mumbai, the gap is short and explosive, but in Pune, the gap is long and cold, days of planning, a failed attempt in between. Was conversation not an option at all? Conversation, the process of moving your tongue and spitting out words, saying something like, I cannot marry you. I want to marry someone else. Let's call this off. Something like this. There in Mumbai, two people couldn't have a conversation about a door. Here in Pune, two more people couldn't have a conversation about a wedding. So a man was stabbed on a train and another man was pushed off a cliff. And this is what I want to talk about. Not the violence, the missing conversation. And I know how this argument can go wrong. It's easy to say crime is getting worse, society is breaking down, young people have no values. But that version is wrong. In fact, violent crimes have actually decreased over decades. Murder rates in India today are significantly lower than they were 40 or 50 years ago. The reality is, fewer people are killing fewer people, at least statistically. So, if it's not that crime is going up, what's actually changing? Two things. First, because of social media, we get to know about all kinds of crimes from all kinds of places instantly. And second, the kind of crime is changing, and the kind of person committing it is also changing. The man on the train wasn't a gangster, he was a 30-year-old guy going home. The girl on the fort wasn't a henchman for some godfather. She was 20 years old, engaged to be married in 5 months. These aren't the people the system was watching. They aren't people anyone would have predicted. They are regular people who, somewhere along the way, lost something. Now, whatever it can be, like peace of mind, morals, ethics, maybe they accumulated frustration that came out in the worst possible way. But they did lose something. And let's get into this. What did they lose? Now, Hannah Arendt, a German philosopher, 20th century, she watched Nazi Germany happen and then spent the rest of her life trying to figure out how. She had a phrase for it: the banality of evil. She came up with it watching the trial of Adolf Eichmann. Eichmann was one of the senior administrators of the Holocaust. He looked after logistics, train schedules. He sent millions of people to their deaths on paper. On paper, not like physically he didn't kill, but he sent them on paper. When she watched his trial, she expected to see a monster, and she did not. She saw a clerk, a boring, ordinary, probably slightly nervous bureaucrat, a regular working man. Her conclusion was that, and by the way, this was wildly controversial at that time, and probably it still is. But her conclusion was that the worst things humans do to each other are not done by monsters. They are done by ordinary people who have lost the capacity to think about what they are doing. Not think morally, just think at all. To register the action as a real thing happening to a real person. Now, Aikman signed paperwork. The paperwork resulted in deaths. Aikman couldn't connect the two things in the head. They lived in separate compartments. And that's what Arendt meant. Not that he was secretly a monster pretending to be normal, but he was actually genuinely normal. And that normal people, when something specific gets hollowed out of them, can do things that monsters do. Now, the same thing got hollowed out of the murderer on the train. It got hollowed out of the girl who planned to kill her fiancé. And the same thing can get hollowed out of all of us in much smaller amounts every day. The capacity to fully register that the person in front of you is a person with the same problems, same Monday blues, with an old mother, with someone waiting for them at home, with similar hopes and dreams you have that you are about to end. This capacity to register that the person in front of you is a person just like you is not automatic. It is a skill, it is a practice. It gets stronger with use and weaker without use. And we are living in a moment that does almost nothing to strengthen it and almost everything to weaken it, on the other hand. This algorithm, the social media algorithm, it dehumanizes. Every fight in your feed is a stranger to be defeated, not a person to be understood. The economy dehumanizes. Every interaction is transactional. Every coworker is a competitor. Every neighbor is a potential rival for a shrinking pie. Even our entertainment dehumanizes. We have made a whole genre of content out of watching people fail in public. By the time you get on a train at the end of the day, you have been trained gently, consistently for 15 hours to see other people as obstacles, threats, content, and not people. And then a guy disagrees with you about a door, and you do what you had to. And the part of you that should have said, "This is a fellow human, we can maybe talk about this," that part doesn't fire because that part has been underused for so long that you have forgotten how to use it. Now, I also want to talk about the second case for a second because the Pune case is harder to explain. The Mumbai case is the stranger case, not stranger, I mean the stranger by Camus. Museold was on the beach. The sun was very bright. He didn't really think about it. It just happened, on the spur of moment. It was spontaneous. The crime was spontaneous. But the Pune case is the crime and punishment case. Now, Crime and Punishment is Dostoevsky's novel from 1866. Now, the story is about a poor student named forgive me if I'm pronouncing this wrong as well. Raskolnikov. Raskolnikov, yeah. And he decides to kill an old woman who lent him money. He doesn't decide it in a rage, in a spur of moment. He decides it slowly, over weeks. He builds an elaborate intellectual argument for why it's permitted, why he's the kind of the person who is allowed to do this, and why the old woman doesn't really count as a full person. He commits the murder, and then the entire rest of the novel is about the slow collapse of every justification he built. He can't sleep, he gets sick, he almost confesses to strangers in the street. The thing he convinced himself was a clean philosophical decision turns out to be a thing he has to live inside for the rest of his life. Now, Dostoevsky's point was when you build a wall in your head that lets you stop seeing another person as a person, the wall doesn't hold. You will eventually have to look at what you actually did, and sooner or later, that truth will be difficult to live with, if at all you are a sane person and stay that way. And also, something similar happens to Macbeth, by the way. Now, the girl at the fort, the Pune girl, and I'm speculating this, she built a wall in her head. Days of planning a murder, it is a wall building. Meeting at a cafe to discuss it is a wall building. Scouting the fort is wall building. Failing the first attempt and coming back to finish it is it all of this is wall building. By the day of the murder in her head, Ketan was probably not Ketan anymore. He was a problem, a variable. The thing standing between her and whatever she wanted. And the Instagram post she posted afterwards is the most telling part to me. You left me on my birthday. That's not a person hiding. That's a person who has built a wall so thick that she has multiple realities running simultaneously and she doesn't even notice the contradiction. One reality where she pushed him, and one reality where she's mourning him. Both functional in her head at the same time. And that's what Dostoevsky was warning about. Not just that you'll do the terrible things. He was warning about that you will convince yourself you didn't do it. And then the wall will start cracking. And then you will have nowhere to go. Just like Macbeth. The crack in her wall in this case happened to be the Instagram story going viral and the police investigation that followed. But the crack would have come anyway. Sooner or later, it always does. So now we must ponder over that. What's the answer here? This is one of those questions you have to sit with yourself. And the people who give 3 clean step solutions to this kind of thing are lying. What I do have is an observation. And the observation is this. The space between I disagree with you and I am willing to end your life over this, that space is everything. That space is what makes civilization possible. That space is what makes marriages possible. That space is what makes a train ride home possible. A safe one. The space is made of one specific muscle, the muscle of seeing the other person as a full person, as a person just like yourself. If you don't use this muscle, it shrinks. If everyone around you is also not using this muscle, it shrinks faster. The Mumbai murder and the Pune murder are not symptoms of a society becoming more violent. They are symptoms of a society where that one specific muscle is getting weaker, and in a lot of people at the same time. We are not seeing more violence. We are seeing violence in places where the muscle should have prevented it. But before the ending, I write novels. And the most recent is The Rich Man's Game. It's about a man who has built an entire philosophical justification for ending the lives of people he thinks aren't living the right way. The novel is essentially what happens to that wall over the course of one terrible year. I didn't write about the man on the train or the girl at the fort. I wrote it before either of these things happened. But I'm not surprised either of them happened because the wall I was writing about is the same wall that they were building. Currently, the book is in the process of being published. You can follow the channel to know when it drops. Subscribe if something here was worth coming back to, or don't. Musalt didn't subscribe to anything either, and his life worked out the way it worked out. Coming back to The Stranger, there's a detail in this book that doesn't get talked about as much as it should. At Musalt's trial, the lawyer don't spend most of their time on the murder. They spend it on the fact that he didn't cry at his mother's funeral. That is one of the details in the book. The prosecution argues, and the court accepts, that the real evidence of his monstrousness is that he was emotionally absent at his mother's funeral. The point Camus was making, I think, is that they were right, but for the wrong reason. The not crying isn't the cause of the murder. The not crying and the murder are the same thing. Both are the evidence of the muscle not firing. The capacity to feel your mother's death and the capacity to feel a stranger's life have the same root. If one is missing, the other one will eventually be missing too. What I see in the Mumbai case and the Pune case is not an explosion of violence. It is the slow dying out of the muscle that should have stopped it. In a society, in families, in individuals, in all of us to some extent. The question isn't whether you would stab someone over a train door. You wouldn't. Almost nobody would. The question is how strong the muscle is and how often you are using it, and whether the world you live in is helping it grow or letting it shrink. That's a question worth sitting with. Even if there's no clean answer, are you practicing empathy?